The early days of the internet and the early days of artificial intelligence have more in common than most people realize. And also, like the early days, some people had chances to get into those internet companies before their valuations exploded. In today's video, I'm going to cover why Bittensor could be one of those companies to invest in before it explodes. So hit that like button and let's jump into it. Alright, today we're going to jump into Bittensor and why I think it could be one of those opportunities like the early days of the internet, similar to how some of the early internet giants were valued before they became trillion-dollar companies. These evaluations of today's companies for artificial intelligence show you just how much room there is to grow in this space. When the internet companies of today are valued worth trillions and the artificial intelligence companies are still in the billions, there's a lot of room to grow in this space. These valuations show us that artificial intelligence is in motion, but the subnet layer is still being overlooked. If y'all remember when Google went public in 2004, it was valued at about $23 billion. Today it's worth well over $1 trillion, so you can see the potential that is in the artificial intelligence space. We're still very early on, kind of like it was back in the early 2000s when internet was just getting started. There's a lot of artificial intelligence companies out there that already have huge valuations, but if you look at the subnet space that is the backbone and the foundation of the artificial intelligence, that is still very undervalued, and that's where Bittensor comes in. If you kind of think about it, for the internet, you know, you had Google and Amazon and other big companies like that, Facebook and others that took over the social media space. Well, if you think about artificial intelligence, there are some big artificial intelligence companies out there, but if you look at Bittensor, they're kind of like the internet service providers that are providing the subnets for this artificial intelligence space to build on. So they're kind of like the internet service providers out there that are still very undervalued and very overlooked. So I'm going to show you this article here. You guys can read this. There's a ton of information about Bittensor and the subnets. So if you look at this here, it says Introduction to Bittensor, the components of the Bittensor platform. This goes into the different subnets and the Bittensor blockchain, the Bittensor SDK, and all kinds of information about this. I highly recommend that you guys read through this. It gives you a background information about Bittensor. You can also go into understanding the subnets and how they work, because if you think about it, really, if you're going to invest in something, you want to try to understand it. So you guys take a look at this and reading about the subnets and the anatomy of subnets and how they work, because it's very useful information. If you're going to invest in something like this, you should be knowledgeable about it. It also talks about the liquidity pools with the alpha tokens. I've talked about the alpha tokens in the video. It talks about the price rate of the alpha tokens and emissions of Bittensor, how it's decentralized and all the subnets work. Every subnet's kind of like its own startup with its own team, its own direction, and its own tokenomics. So think about that for a minute. Some subnets specialize in language models, others specialize in finance, others specialize in other areas. So each subnet has its own niche that it's building for. I also highly recommend that you read the Bittensor paradigm here on bittensor.com/about. This talks about the Bittensor's vision for decentralized AI and answers a lot of questions about Bittensor so you can understand it better, why they think that they are the new revolutionary blockchain that's better potentially than Bitcoin. So I highly recommend that you read through this information, because it's essential to know what Bittensor is all about before you decide to invest in this. But the information is very useful and helps you understand Bittensor better and what they're doing and why it may be a good investment for you. So this article here talks about Bittensor's hidden growth engine, the rise of subnets, and kind of sets the stage as to why Bittensor could be a good investment, why its valuation is still low. It talks about how most of the Bittensor subnets are still in discovery phase, meaning the valuations haven't gone parabolic yet. That's why this moment feels much like the early 90s internet infrastructure is being built, but the mass adoption hasn't arrived yet. It's still the early stages of artificial intelligence and subnets and artificial intelligence. If you think about it, you never really heard about any of this a year or so ago with the subnets and artificial intelligence. So now this is brand new technology that's coming out. We haven't had a real all season yet. I think some of these projects like this have the potential to really take off. And once this money starts flowing into these higher risk altcoins is when you could potentially see some of these projects take off. So we haven't seen that yet. We saw a little bit of it in March of 2024. We haven't seen it yet in 2025. Hopefully we'll start seeing some of that momentum over the next several months here. We'll have to keep an eye on the markets and how they're doing, but this is one of those projects that you want to take a look at, because it's a potential for it to do well. Now, just don't go invest in something just because I'm doing a video on it. Make sure you understand it. Make sure that you research it. Do your own due diligence before investing in Bittensor. Make sure that you invest responsibly and that your investments are diversified. Don't go just jumping into something just because some YouTuber is doing a video. I'm just providing information why I think it's an interesting project. Don't go investing in it just because some YouTuber out there like me is doing a video. Make sure you do your own research. If you want to know more about Bittensor subnets, how the ecosystem is growing, there's a lot of great resources out there. One of the resources I highly recommend is the Revenue Research Podcast hosted by DSV. They do a deep dive into the subnets and where the ecosystem is headed with those. Another one, of course, would be the Bittensor white paper. I highly recommend that you read that and the article that I showed you earlier in the video. Those are some great resources to get you started in understanding the subnets with Bittensor. If you'd like to dig deeper into how DSV invests into some of these subnets and they do a deep dive in these, I'll leave a link for their website in the description below for you guys to look into that. That's another useful resource. So, for example, on this docs.learnbittensor.org, it talks about understanding the subnets. There's tons of different subnets out there. It talks about subnet 1 on here, but subnet 5 also focuses on AI search capabilities, and subnet 8 focuses on pushing innovation and financial data analysis. So each subnet has its own economy, its own incentives, and its own growth mechanisms. So it's important to understand each subnet, what their use case is, and the whole ecosystem behind them. There's also information in here about a walkthrough about subnet 1. Subnet 1, for instance, is dedicated to a natural language processing, effectively acting like an open source counterpart to centralized AI companies. They talk about answering questions, summarizing a given text, debugging code, translating languages, solving mathematics problems, and more. There's also more information in here if you dig deep into these subnets. So I talked about DSV Fund earlier and how they do the podcast and they do deep dives into these subnets that they're investing in. If you take a look at their website here, and I'll leave a link for this in the description below, like I said, they're allocating capital where intelligence is incentivized. They're the first hedge fund focused exclusively on Bittensor. So you guys can read through this and discover what they're doing on their website here. There's a lot of information on this hedge fund and what they're doing. I highly recommend that you go through the about this and the team. If you look at the team behind this, they have an experienced team. So you can go through and read about the team, but they're essentially one of the first professional players in this space where they're exclusively investing in certain technologies like these Bittensor subnets. But they are a hedge fund, and if you're wanting more information into these subnets and which ones that they think are good, you guys can check them out. So it's definitely something that you guys want to check into, but I do want to warn you that you do need to be informed as to what you're investing in if you invest in some of these subnets. So just be careful out there. There's this article on Reddit here that you want to take a look at. It talks about being careful with investing in new subnets. So they have a warning on here that you guys should be aware of, just so you guys know this. This says new subnets being registered on Bittensor have no emissions for at least 7 days. There's no liquidity, and unless you know what you're doing, you'll get wrecked. So just be careful out there. They talk about how you really need to understand the liquidity in these subnets before you invest in them, because if you invest in them too early, you can get wrecked because there's no liquidity. So just be careful of that. So these subnets can be great investments at times, but you want to make sure that the price is stabilized and the liquidity is there and stabilized before you invest in them. So that's just one thing that I do want you to be aware of before you invest in some of the subnets. That way you don't get wrecked. So just like the early days of the internet, they transformed commerce with e-commerce. They transform the whole landscape and how we communicate with each other. These subnets could transform the AI landscape for the future, and they are kind of like the backbone of the AI infrastructure. So just kind of keep that in mind, that there could be the early days of the internet with artificial intelligence with these subnets. But obviously, make sure you do your own research before you invest in anything like this, because these are higher risk plays. Make sure your portfolio is diversified, and always make sure you do your own research and your own due diligence before investing. That's all I've got for this video, guys. I appreciate it. We'll see you on the next video.